just literally just me walking off, turning on the light, and walking back.
Right. It's Griffin.
And it's Ryan. Welcome back.
And tonight we're talking about Burst City from 1982. A very interesting movie by Sogo Ishii or Gakuryu Ishii. Interesting director from Fukuoka, which is in the south of Japan. This is a very interesting, grainy, gritty 16 millimeter. I think many people would call it a masterpiece. But I've actually watched this movie before, but I've never paid attention all the way through because this is a movie that is so much more about spectacle than it is about story and about plot. That we will go over the story and the plot, but it's certainly not the most important part of the movie.
Yeah, I think definitely it was more of an aesthetic first, plot second type of deal, or it's more of just a vibe. Honestly,
it's a strong vibe. It's an intense vibe, and to be fair, what they managed is impressive. I mean, this movie has thousands of people in it, despite having absolutely no reason to have like a sizable budget.
It doesn't look like it had a budget, honestly.
But the amount of human resources involved is really
insane.
It's insane.
This is like this. There's enough people in there to warrant it to be considered like a Asian motion picture production,
right?
Like
despite
the fact that there's
no studio involvement seems to be whatsoever.
And I think it's just Toei was just involved for distribution. I don't think they were like producing or anything. So really, this is more of just a independently.
Well, and they may have given them some money up front, but it certainly wasn't like a sizable investment. But they did. I mean, they built like what seems to be some sort of. First of all, where do they even find a desert wasteland in Japan? I've been to Japan. I've never seen a desert wasteland in Japan. But certainly they've built one. They've built one kind of like on par, almost with Mel Gibson,
Mad Max.
Yeah, Mad Max movies in here. Like at least like an indie Japan Mad Max kind of location. Supposedly, I heard that they built this incredible post kind of apocalyptic landscape, and then they lived in it while they made this movie.
That's pretty fucking sick.
Pretty crazy. But this is definitely like an every frame a painting kind of movie, where you're basically constantly being treated to visuals that you wish you could.
I don't think
there
isn't a single frame in which the visual isn't somewhat stimulating or interesting to look at, or like it's trying to, convey something or some kind of emotional reaction from you.
Well, and I think like if you imagine like the cinema landscape at the time, I could very easily see people being wildly overstimulated by this. Mm-hmm. Now with the kind of the TikTok attention span that we've got these days, I'm not sure it's quite the overload. But I mean, it's rapid cuts, constant shifts in the speed of the film, constant like looping, like ramp ups, slow downs, slow mo, constant edits, a really, really, really intensive amount of B-roll.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie's like honestly a sight to behold. What happens in this movie, Ryan?
That's a very
what the heck
question.
happens in this movie?
So I'm going to come out and say it. I've never watched this movie. This is the first time I ever watched it. I'm actually not familiar with Ishii's other work at all. This is probably my first purview into his stuff. And I would say I feel like I've seen this movie in other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You've seen its spirit like seeping out
just
of other
aspects
places.
of it all over the place and just other forms of media. But it's the story is like super. Honestly, it's not laid out for you overt or anything like that, or explicitly laid out, or there's no expository dialogue to really tell you much what's going on. A lot of it is you kind of just have to pick up on it visually.
Yeah, pretty much. It is, and it is a very visual form of storytelling,
right?
And it does have like this bone structure of a couple different, basically like concert sequences, and the concert sequences are kind of create like a framework, and then the rest of the impressive amount of footage kind of pulls you in and out of it. I mean, it's a 2-hour long music video.
This is it's essentially a feature-length music video with rooted in different subcultures of Japanese punk, and it's not cyberpunk because cyberpunk didn't necessarily exist at the time, but this is clearly like a proto-cyberpunk type material, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely deals with some cyberpunky themes,
which like, and a lot of it,
they're constantly like in conflict with the police who are like out like brutalizing people and seem to have like laser guns of some kind.
And they look like stormtroopers.
But there's two
like major. There's like an A plot and a B plot going on, and the A plot is I would argue the A plot is the biker bros. I don't think they have a name necessarily, but they're the two guys on the motorcycle and how
I could go 50-50 on this, but I do agree that those are the two.
Yeah, and then they deal with like the Yakuza plot,
Right.
And then the B plot is the punks essentially, or like the rockers versus and the rivalry with the other punk group, the Stalin, yeah. And
which are two seminal punk groups from Japan in the 80s.
Yeah.
Sogo, I think, seemed to be interested in creating some like this kind of like we were here kind of monument. It's almost like a headstone to it's like a monument. It really is. It's a filmic monument to the punk scene.
I feel like
1980s Japan.
This is one of those like time capsule films.
Totally.
If that makes sense. It's not necessarily
and expertly crafted.
Yeah, it doesn't feel manufactured. It feels completely organic.
It feels like many, especially the kind of B-roll footage, the kind of like documentary style footage they have in a lot of sequences, feels like they are capturing moments where people had no idea the camera was on them.
There's just a living, breathing like world that you just kind of get a glimpse into. It's slightly voyeuristic in that sense.
It does, and it also has like an electricity to it that actually there's nothing. It's really interesting when you think about something slice of life like that, or peeking into another person's life. You think of maybe like John Deal, or you think of like The Bicycle Thief or something like that. But this is like very electric stuff, you know, and it's constantly being infused with a lot of energy. Just like swinging, panning shots of like neon lights, constantly like revved up footage of like a motorcycle like tearing down the freeway. It's like injected with like so much intensity.
So I think there's not like a lot of locations that the film uses either. It's and even with that in mind,
and we discussed that maybe some of the locations are reused, and the movie's clever enough to keep you from visually recognizing them.
And like it uses the darkness to its advantage, definitely in hiding a lot of the aspects of like the limited nature of a lot of the sets. I feel like and it seems like it was filmed in like a junkyard or scrapyard with like some quarry section next to it, like some flat land near the water somewhere.
Yeah, like some industrial space, some industrial post wasteland.
They use industrial interiors like all the time in the film, and I think it lends to that kind of the post-apocalyptic nature of it all. It's just there's no real nature left.
Yeah,
at most you see is like grass.
Yeah. No, I mean it's and the camera's like constantly like digging around in the garbage. There's like swinging, like crawling shots where the camera is like kind of like rustling through like refuse, and like
the cinematography is clearly like intentional. Like there's extremely so much intent behind every use of the camera,
and patient.
Yeah, and it's when it's under cranking or over cranking like certain scenes in order to like heighten the drama, either like slow mo or speed up and stuff like that, while keeping the sound real time. It's a stylistic choice, and it kind of like it aesthetically conveys this kind of dream-esque quality. Well, I don't want to say dream because this thing's more of like a
nightmare,
like
but no, but it does have some dream. It has some dreaming. It does feel like this movie to me feels like it exists in a state between being awake and really dreaming.
Yeah.
And it's one thing I thought was really funny is that it does have. I mean, the characters are talking a lot, so it's not like they're like. So there isn't really a lot of emphasis on plot, but the people are saying things, and they are stating their feelings, and they have a lot of feelings, and so it's kind of interesting. Like they complain about work a lot, or not working, or refusing to work, or they don't believe in work. The movie almost exists as like an outside perspective on the monolith of Japanese work culture.
There's definitely a sense of social critique going on from a
outsider perspective,
like either outsider's perspective or like a subculture.
Yeah,
because I think the punks is the subculture and the outsider is the slum folk.
Sure, that's true actually.
Because there's two like major like. Even within the class structure that is established, or the fictional structure or systems of class that is established within the film, there's a clear disparity between the punks and the slums.
Yeah, that's true. And then there's an even bigger disparity maybe between the Yakuza characters and the punks,
right?
And then the cops and the Yakuza are kind of.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because amongst the Yakuza characters, you see some of them emulate the style of the punks.
It's true.
Which, it just leads me to believe that those are, punks that are social climbers. And you see
Maybe.
some of the youths that are dressing like the Yakuza
and that's actually interesting, right? Because in some ways the punks are they seem very reflective of. So there's this traditional kind of biker gang from like 20th century Japan called the Bosozoku, and the Bosozoku I think has always been viewed in Japan as basically like baby's first step towards being a Yakuza.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's like a perfect pipeline where you go from one to the other. But the idea of a delinquent and what their future
into a gangster type deal.
Exactly.
Which, I think that just makes sense. It just adds credence to the natural progression of the world. It's there's an aspect of it where it's like you can't or an aspect conveyed to the film where you can't escape this city.
It's a very fatalistic kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a kind of like that neo-noir. There are like neo-noir elements to it, which I think lends credence to the idea that it is a cyberpunk kind of feature, where you see what life is like in like the red light district or something, and for individuals in that are trying to social climb within a criminal enterprise, and like how that plays out, and how it's just there's so many interesting ideas, and they're just so interconnected in a very it doesn't feel forced the way
organic.
that they overlap or feel interconnected. It just feels like they're organically laced together just because they happen to live in the same area.
One thing I think is really funny is that the punks are constantly complaining about being bored.
Yeah. And
I think that's really funny and really interesting. It's something like very, very like late capitalist, very like post-industrial, of not having material concerns and then having stress building up within you, and then you just fucking pop.
Right.
You just go fucking crazy.
And they're kind of
like boredom is like the fucking road to punk.
Yeah.
And this is the road to like these explosions.
They're clearly
and they constantly got to attack each other and fight each other.
Yeah, they're clearly like wound up about
Yeah.
something. And it's just like they're so dissatisfied with like the 9-to-5 grind. And I think this is just it's of its time, but also remains still relevant.
Of course.
Because, before the film came out, the Asian stock market crash hadn't occurred yet, or the financial crisis in East Asia.
I mean, it's actually perfect because
Yeah.
in '82, the idea that Japan was going to like slow down economically is no one on earth is predicting that.
Right. It was essentially like what Japan was experiencing in the early 80s was what the Americans would experience in like the mid to late 80s, like that big industrial economic boom. The machine's too big to fail type of deal.
Sure. I mean, Japan was. That's kind of what's cool about outsiders at this time. Is their dissatisfaction is in the face of a world that's kind of that could not be full of more. Like if you imagine things like remember in Back to the Future 2, Marty McFly's got that, like, he works for some in future Marty McFly, he's like works for some faceless Japanese corporation, and he gets like fired by fax machine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's this idea, that they make that joke in American Psycho, like this entire country is going to be, owned by Japan by the end of the 80s. There's this idea that like Japan, is there's only one way for Japan, and it's forward. And like the people at that time who are not partaking in that or aren't buying into that, they seem particularly rebellious, actually. And the movie's super gritty and grainy, and there's just like so many shots that are like feel like they're shot in the dark and with like strobe effects. It's just iconic.
Which, I mean, it kind of makes sense because they do work, clearly.
They talk about it.
Well, they had jobs. A lot of them got fired.
Yeah.
And one of them, like, you see one of them at their job, I figured, for a while, and he's doing his work, but he just keeps getting like shit on by his boss. And then he like whacks him with a wrench across his face. Which
he was working in a garage, right? Yeah. He's like, I'm not listening to you anymore. Yeah, he like assaults his boss that was, I don't know, it's really funny. And there's like lots of weird throwaway lines about
the other two members of like the band. They're working at a factory, and then they straight up suplex their boss.
Yes. Yeah, they flip him over, and they say something really funny when they do it too. They're like, I hope we never see him again. Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, they hit him with a one-liner.
Yeah. But there's like weird funny lines too about like how like the store's been closed for 2 weeks.
What store?
Yeah, what store? Like the movie doesn't bother to explain what the economics of this world is, but they certainly exist within a society.
Right. It's just they're clearly not reaping the benefits of whatever economic system that they're attempting to participate
Right.
attempted to participate in.
Yeah, and the Yakuzas are treated like such parasites.
Yeah, they kind of are because they are essentially. They roll in. I think I have the Kikawa clan. I think that's what they're called. Uh, they're construction. They're into construction, and they come into. I'm just gonna call it Burst City. I don't know what the actual city's name is, but
The funny thing is they keep calling it this city.
yeah, this city.
Yeah,
I don't
they
think they refer to it by name, and
Yeah.
I can't read Japanese at all, so I don't know.
Yeah,
What the sign
maybe it did have a
said.
name in the kanji. I didn't read the kanji.
But you know, they come into Burst City, and they go, "There's atomic power here."
Yeah,
and
and they're gonna build a nuclear power plant.
I think the funniest part is that their entire that entire expository monologue is told to the pimp character from the Red Light District,
right.
who has this entire subplot going on, and
That one's to me the most mysterious. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, he's corresponding with the Yakuza guy from the opening scene of the movie where they get run off the road by the motorcycle bros or the biker bros, who are their own deal. They're ripped straight out of a Mad Max movie.
Yeah, they're like a Mad Max like movie of their own.
Yeah. And
Ryan theorizes that they're communicating telepathically. Which
okay, so there's precedence for this, and I feel like it's completely missed.
It's
if you're-
established that one of them doesn't speak at all.
Yeah,
and then
only yells.
Yeah, and he basically just screams, and they do grunt at each other a lot.
Right.
And they have knowing eye contact with one another.
Yeah. But
Is it telepathy?
I don't know. Okay, to be fair, I don't know.
I mean,
I
don't.
Stretching. It's
Here's
just
the
a
thing.
theory.
This movie doesn't,
it doesn't explain a
doesn't
lot.
explain
It's-
anything. So
it's a lot for you to explain for yourself,
yeah,
I guess.
you get to come up with your own conclusions.
But so yeah,
There's a lot going on. Like I said, there's like thousands of people in this movie.
But I think the point I was trying to get to was the expository like evil dialogue about the whole atomic plant in the junkyard.
Right.
They're doing it while they're helping each other stretch, like do their daily stretches.
Yeah, I thought that was weird too. They were doing like
And then-
calisthenics.
They started playing.
And it's like in the middle of this junkyard that we were talking about, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, this is gonna be great.
And they start playing baseball and
Yes, with the garbage
Yeah.
can with like they start playing baseball with garbage.
And I think what was really interesting was the pimp guy. He'll dress one way when being with the Yakuza guys, but then he'll dress a different way when speaking with like the slum folk because they don't have a group name. They're just called the people of the slums, right? Which also, aside from this is another social commentary I think the film was making, especially like on media and stuff like that, because every time you get a glimpse of the media on like television and stuff, it's a complete vilification of the youth and of the slums.
Right.
They like essentially they make it seem like
it's something that needs to be contained,
either contained or eliminated, or like it's like a disease, essentially like some kind of social disorder that's spreading.
Yeah.
Which I think it's interesting because it's kind of conveyed in that way visually too, because in the slums you have a lot of these characters that are wearing World War II Japanese imperialist uniforms that are acting like a certain way that I think is you're supposed to like take it as they are either suffering from post-traumatic stress or like, you know, some sort of mental trauma that has occurred that has caused them to change, right? And the scene immediately following, like how you're seeing like their bodies jerk and stuff like that, it cuts to the red light district with the punk rockers essentially jerking the same way but listening to music. It's almost like this parallel of social commentary being like, oh, this is potentially like a social negative or something like that, which I don't think it's the film saying that necessarily, but more of like argument being
the movie is connecting the humanity or some
something.
It's connecting like something about being an outsider,
right?
About like not being
definitely
quite
like
right.
You know, the slum folk and the punk rockers and like that like group are much closer together, like social class wise or socially speaking, than they are to the Yakuza or like the cops or the police.
Yeah, the forgotten people and the rejected people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so where the A plot kind of deals with the biker bros joining up with the slum folk and being taken in and then having their entire labor exploited because these are just poor people to help build this atomic power plant
which is always
for
the
the
evil in
for the
Japanese media.
for the Yakuza.
It's a time of power.
And the B plot is really just the
Basically, the punkers are just constantly fighting one another until the end when they like team up to fight the cops.
they race cars,
They do race cars. They like that. They race motorcycles and cars.
they fight each other,
They fight each other a lot.
they fight the cops,
They
get arrested, they somehow get out,
Sometimes, yeah.
and
Somehow,
then they
for
just
some reason.
play another
They
concert.
just do more of it, yeah. And then eventually they all team up to fight the cops again at the end.
Yes, and their rivals are this one group called the Stalin.
Yeah. So each of the different bands they're supposed to be like seminal punk bands from the period. Sogo's like basically got groups from Tokyo. He's got groups from down south, like in Kyushu, and he's got some people who I think are even from Kansai. And it's supposed to be like kind of like this tasting menu of the punk scene in
There's
80s,
definitely a
80s Japan.
wide variety of punk and like different inspirations for the punk sound that they're like putting on display, because there's much more traditional punk, I feel like, and then more blues inspired, more rock inspired, and even some ska inspirations in there. I like the whole had that up down thing. Yeah, that's clearly like a ska.
Yeah, true.
And it's so energetic.
Yeah,
it makes it.
And the concerts by themselves probably could have been
carried the film,
and just could have been like their own thing. Each one of those could have been their own thing. And he just decided to just go so much further with it.
I like watching this film, and I think back on it, and I'm just comparing it to like other concert films that I've also kind of seen, or like band movies, I guess, like.
Yeah, music video movies.
And I think it's so interesting because the Beatles have like two, Yellow Submarine and Hard Day's Night, and
they might have more than that, to be honest.
Probably, but in the opening of the second cold open, essentially the one that introduces the punk rockers, right? They walk over torn up Beatles posters on the ground.
I didn't even notice, but that's perfect.
From their like 50s and 60s, basically before their whole psychedelic reinvention, and their
before psych rock
venture into experimentalism,
right?
There's definitely some glam rock inspirations all over this movie, I feel like.
Well, I think it's interesting is that there's a lot of makeup in this movie, and to be fair, like when you look at some like punk rock movies from the 80s, maybe you watch like Class of Nukem High, watch some of the Trauma movies, stuff like that, there is some makeup in the 80s punk world, but it almost seems like more showier than what we think of, like this is like it has a more new wavy kind of look than punk in the West did.
I think that's an interesting point that you actually make, because in one of the races against, I think they're called the Street Killers or whatever.
Yeah, there's all these like fake gangs that show
it's kind of like Warriors in this, the Warriors in that sense.
It's very Warriors.
Yeah, which is another really great film. But the rockers race the Street Killers, or this one guy from the Street Killers, and he has these sunglasses and he takes them off, and he shows that how his makeup is all much more like flamboyant or whatever than the other guys, and they don't really care, because I don't think it's about flamboyance to them. It's more of just like a accentuation, or if that makes sense. It's not like about being showy, it's more of being cool. Like this is just a cool thing.
Yeah. It's a lot of posturing though.
Yeah, it is a lot of posturing. I mean,
but I like it. I mean, I think it's cool.
Looking at all the, I don't want to call it costumes because I don't think they're costumes. I mean,
that's the thing that's funny. Like, are these costumes?
So for the slumlords,
because the funny thing about it is this movie walks the line between being kind of documentary-esque in some ways and being like this post-apocalyptic, like high concept sci-fi kind of movie.
So for the slum folk, I would say that's costuming. I think that's obviously costuming.
Right. Like, but all the bands do kind of seem like maybe
that's just what they are.
Yeah.
Maybe not the Stalin, because like they're just wearing like red robes. And I don't think like a band wearing red robes can get
maybe though. I don't know. That's the thing. I only know these people and these bands from this movie, so I have no idea.
I think it is interesting though that a kind of a what is it? A distinction between the rockers and the Stalin, aside from like their whole colors and theming. The rockers being much more like leather and the Stalin just being red, is that the Stalin I think are more anarchistic, like in theming, like in nature, they're just more anarchists, whereas the rockers are definitely more punk. It's uh like yeah, sure they're assholes to everyone, but they're mostly assholes to people that are also assholes to them, or people that are like representations of the system in place. Whereas the Stalin are just like kind of assholes to everyone. They show up on their bus, like playing, yelling at the crowd to get out the way or get run over, and they call them like animals or garbage or trash and stuff like that. And it's definitely more of an anarchist vibe. It's just total chaos versus a anti-establishment chaos, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that I kind of agree with that actually. But it's kind of interesting though, because like, you know, the rockers are treated maybe more like kind of like the main gang, and like the Stalin are kind of their
There's definitely more of a
antagonists.
heroic kind of vibe around the rockers. Like these are like the home players type
Well,
deal.
just like one of the first times you really see the Stalin is like when they like show up at the rockers concert and like attack everyone.
Yeah.
And then the cops come, and then everyone's just fighting.
So
and a lot of this is like in the dark.
Yeah, a recurring motif of the rocker subplot, or the B plot of the movie, is that the rockers, whenever on their second concert they get attacked on stage, like these dudes in red hoods just jump them on the stage and then beat them up with baseball bats and stuff like that.
One thing that's really impressive about this, by the way, is this is so many people on camera at once, and it's really, really, really impressive crowd work.
Yeah, like I'm surprised they were able to like maintain so much control over like such a large crowd.
Right. And that it does look like they're actually fighting and attacking one another.
It's
like
utter
how do you
chaos.
teach all these random people how to like pretend how to fight?
Right. And this looks like one of those kind of fights that you would see recorded even today on like an iPhone or something like that.
Yeah. It's got some World Star vibes for sure.
And you know, the camera gets in there too.
Yes. The camera in general just gets into nooks and crannies,
it's
and
not
like right into
a third person omniscient view. It's like the camera is in the mosh pit, like moshing with these people.
And in general, this is like very, very impressive concert footage. You know, because it feels very, very lively. It feels very intense. It feels like there is a really thick crowd there.
I'm surprised.
And there's like, constantly smoke and like explosions going on behind.
There wasn't
performing.
more fires or anything, like accidental fires like caught on camera or anything, or like the camera itself catching fire with all the sparklers and explosions going on.
And you also, because of the behavior and the nature of the characters, you could never tell what somebody was supposed to be doing or what they caught someone doing.
Right.
Like there's a sequence at the beginning of the first concert where this one guy just takes his guitar and smashes in these neon lights. Right. And it's like, was he supposed to do that, or did he just do
it because, like, you know,
because that's who
what they would do? Yeah. And there's these moments of like obvious like kind of acting, because I don't think like some of these
the acting in like the actual dialogue is not good.
Yeah.
But like in the moments that are very kind of verite, they're kind of documentary about it. You were certainly sitting there being like, I don't know if this is fake.
Right. You definitely buy that they are these
it's believable
characters per se. I don't think they're necessarily characters. They're just kind of trying to play themselves.
Right.
And in trying to play yourself, sometimes it doesn't come off as like yourself all the time. But once they're just like in it, it's just like the facade is clearly dropped or whatever. Like that inhibition to just be you or an authentic you on camera.
Right.
I don't know.
I think that was so interesting. This is one scene that to me just keeps standing out to me. There's a sequence where I think it's the pimp, but the Yakuza and the like the slum people are like talking to one another, and they're like older characters,
right?
And they're speaking in Keigo, and to me that's so fucking weird. So Keigo is like very formal Japanese. And
I think I know which scene you're talking about. The one where it's like, "Do you remember me?"
Yes.
And then he starts like bowing back and forth. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
It's so weird to me that anyone would speak to each other in Keigo, because this movie is like full of just like the nastiest, driest, like, yeah, exactly, like hyper masculine Japanese. It's like lots of like rolling, like Yakuza sounding like R rolling kind of, you know, like slurred speech and stuff like that. But to see these two characters like speak in Keigo to one another just feels like very out of place in this movie to me. But maybe it means something just to a domestic Japanese audience. You know, I don't know.
I think that's an interesting thing. Maybe I missed something because that's clearly intentional, mise en scène and all that stuff.
I don't know. I mean, who knows? And maybe it's just that like
Maybe it's more subtextual.
but also maybe they just didn't give those characters that much direction, and they just came in and talked to one another the way they would normally talk to one another.
Interesting.
Which is
I think that just makes it more
Kanga.
interesting overall instead of just keeping
It is funny though also that like none of the and also maybe there's this element where it's like the older characters, like think about things like appearances and stuff like that, and the younger characters are like hyper rebellious and
Right,
like,
they just
don't
more-
think about formalities.
they're more interested in expressionism or expressing themselves authentically versus the formalities of social constructs and stuff like that.
You know what else I think is really weird about this movie?
What?
There's like one female character in it.
Yeah.
There's so little. The
Oh,
beginning of the
wow,
movie
you're
has
right.
some female has women in it. Like there's women at the concerts and stuff like that.
Yeah, but there's
But
only
there's just very-
one actual female character
Character.
in the movie, and I don't think she's named, right? Is she? No one has a name.
She's
really.
a prostitute who gets murdered.
Yeah, she's a prostitute in the red light district. She's like the pimp's main girl, right?
And I couldn't tell if the pimp was supposed to be her dad or not. It's pretty dark, whatever it is. But she like gets strangled by like the guy that they're
Yeah.
all going after. There's this one guy that like everybody has a problem with, and he's been killing people. And like the two biker guys are looking at him looking after him because he killed someone.
Right.
Everybody's after this guy because he killed somebody, and he kills like the one female character. This movie's not passing any Bechdel tests. I'll tell you that.
Right. Which, now that you mention it, that is kind of weird. This movie is
It's weird.
This movie is a bit of a sausage fest.
It's a massive sausage fest for sure. I will say that I wasn't, because I've never paid attention all the way through, I wasn't actually anticipating that, especially because I've seen the beginning of the movie many times, and there are lots of female attendees to the first concert.
Actually,
There's lots of big girls like
there's
feathering
one-
their hair.
There's
and,
one
like,
other female character now I
there?
just recalled. It's from the Street Killers race, like the first race that they have.
Yeah, talking
She's-
shit to them. Yeah,
Yeah, she's
one of the shit talkers.
She's one of his she's his girlfriend, and then once one of the rocker dudes wins, she immediately goes over and like swoons over him. And I
Yeah.
don't think you see her for the rest of the film at all.
No.
But there's
There's probably some subtext in there about.
I
Like,
think there's
women's
one
place in
female
punk
voiceover.
cultures.
there's one female voiceover, and it
Uh-huh.
comes from the police.
Really?
The white stormtrooper looking cops with the RPGs at the
Yeah,
end, where I think it's a woman's voice where
Mhm.
she's like telling them to disperse and stuff like that. But yeah, no, now that you mention it, there is, and she doesn't even survive
No.
either.
And she doesn't have a name. It's just like this weird, sad character. Like they use her to like make the world feel very seedy and very sad.
Yeah, and
that's it.
she just
She's
wants
a tool to like make the world seem.
she doesn't
sad.
want to do this. She has to be convinced of doing it by her pimp in this really, really kind of weird and definitely intense. Not in the way that it's like, like
He rolls around on the ground with her dead body for a while, which is really weird.
yeah, that one was like another like neo noir kind of aspect. I felt like
He does he kill the guy that killed her?
Yeah.
Because he stabs him, but I wasn't 100% sure if
he takes the cane and he starts beating him.
Yeah.
And then he whips out a sword from the cane because
Yeah.
the cane was a sword the entire time, and then he
and
stabs,
then he stabs him in the back.
But it's a really
Then he
long it's a really long sequence because he keeps pushing it through him.
Yeah.
And then like he goes back to her and then like starts rolling.
He like unchains her. She's like chained to the bed or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he just rolls around with her
Because
naked
the
body. while
Yakuza
she-
guy is secretly like this sadomasochist type like gimp suit wearing dude, which is, I think it's an interesting kind of commentary that it's making because in the eyes of the media, the Yakuza or the construction company is the upstanding members of society. They're the job creators. They're the guys who pay for stuff. They're paving the road, paving the way.
They're building the future.
Right? And he's essentially guilty of this degeneracy that the media is placing on the slum folk or the rockers.
It's true. I mean, all of the scenes of prostitution involve the Yakuza guys.
Yeah.
Because they are the ones that run the prostitutes. They're the one who hire the prostitutes.
Right.
They exist in this red light district. And like the punks don't really seem to interact with that really.
Like they're there, but they're not like. It's more of just because they live there.
Yeah.
This
like
is just
where
their
they live.
neighborhood.
It's like where they live. Yeah.
And
It's
I
interesting.
also think like the movie is incredibly stylized, and the movie is incredibly stylistic and aesthetically like it's insane. And the red light district in particular, because when you're first brought there, you're not told it's the red light district or anything. It's just a district literally lit up in red lighting.
Well, in general, the movie can be really interesting about this. Like sometimes you'll see a sequence that's basically like kind of like it's one of these like hyper. I mean, the whole sequence. I mean, every sequence is hyper stylized, but they'll have like this. It'll have like a like a strobe effect, and then there'll just be one dark color in the background. So you'll see something that in front of you that's basically black or white, and then the background will be like red. And I mean, honestly, the movie's beautiful. I mean, like you could like there are probably like 100, maybe more beautiful images you could rip straight out of this movie, make a coffee table book out of it because it's gorgeous. But the colors are actually like when they when they show up, they're really really powerful.
And I think it's part of it is due to the fact that the movie is so dark most of the time.
It's very dark, and it's super contrasty and super grainy. And the grain,
it just makes it feel like more grounded in that sense. Like it's not a production; it's a documentary.
It feels sometimes like a documentary.
Like, like especially in the sense that it's like it's the graininess and the darkness and the poor lighting and the kinetic nature of the camera, because like it just doesn't. There are times when the camera is stationary and put on a tripod and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you get some crane shots here and there, but most of the time it just seems like it's handheld and people just running, hand cranking whatever they can.
Yeah, but it's also just like captures like all these tiny little details. He's very interested in like watching someone light a cigarette or watching somebody like like push their hair over their shoulder. There's just tiny little details constantly. It's like just filling your ocular cavities with information.
Right.
And yeah, I will say that like the graininess I think is probably one of the definitive parts of the look. And the graininess maybe I've wondered, but if that's because they're pushing it so much, the contrast is, and how dimly lit they're shooting in, is making it look grainy. But it's like it's very much like if it suits its purpose. I couldn't help but like thinking about they still have. I was in Japan in spring, and they still have like rockabilly kind of characters who show up on like Sunday afternoons to dance in the park.
That's cool.
And there's this documentary from the 80s. I think it's from like 84 called Tokyo Ga, directed by Wim Wenders, and actually Werner Herzog's in it. It's a really 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 cool documentary.
Whoa.
And it's about Tokyo in the 80s through the lens.
Is that the one where Werner Herzog gets shot?
No.
Do you know about that one?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure Werner Herzog's been shot. That sounds like him. He's threatened to shoot himself on many occasions. But it's a movie about Japan in the 80s, but it's kind of through the lens of Yasujiro Ozu. So it's like about Tokyo, and it's about where Tokyo is now, but it's like through looking at these older images of Tokyo. And the movie gets very, very caught up in modern, like kind of like flavors of Japan, like wax food and like baseball, like what do you call it, batting cages and stuff like that. But
a juxtaposition of the contemporary like Japan or post like modernization Japan versus like what it was like before.
What it was like before, right?
Yeah.
But one of the images that they show in that movie is the rockabilly people dancing in the rain in Yoyogi Park in 1984.
In the rain.
Yeah. But it's just very interesting because that was like probably only 2 years after this, and I seen it still going on in 2023. Well, so there's still people doing it at least many years later.
Some cultures don't really die.
I guess not.
They just kind of continue on.
But it's interesting because this movie reminds me of those people so much. Rockabilly and punk being very different, but kind of related.
I think an interesting thing that the film does is it definitely plays by the rule of three. There's three races,
three concerts,
three major interactions with the police for the most part.
So that's probably true. I can only think of two. They come to the one where the Stalin attacked them, and then the one at the end. Do they come another time too?
So when the rockers get bored after they all quit their jobs and they're like in the car, right? And then he's just like, just do it. What do you mean? If we get caught, we're done. We're gonna get in trouble. And then their leader's just like, dude, just gun it, just race the car or something like that. They just want to race in the street for some reason, and they immediately get pulled over, and they pick a fight with the cops for some reason.
Yeah, I remember that part now.
And then they get arrested. I mean, those cops in particular, come back at the end climax.
Yeah,
everything comes back essentially
Mhm.
for the most part. And I think another interesting aspect is the interactions between the other social classes. So, the biker bros do interact with the rockers at the second race.
Yeah.
And they're kind of tossed around, and they're ostracized.
Well, they keep trying. They keep attacking them and like picking fights with them, and they're like, why can't he talk?
You're right.
Like, why won't he say anything?
Right.
Stuff like that.
And the biker bros do what the biker bros do. It's just they ride off, they race off into the night.
Yeah, they get in a fight and then they ride off into the night.
That's kind of just all they really do.
Yeah,
they're very defensive over their motorcycle, but all they do is just ride around on their motorcycle.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't think you get any real hints of what their entire deal is.
I don't know anything about those characters
until
really.
like a solid like halfway through. So their entire story is very interesting because it's not, you don't really get, there's clearly something going on because these are like two dudes that are straight up ripped from Mad Max, and
they're like Mad Max people in a non-Mad
Max world, and they meet up with other people that look Mad Max adjacent. And
I will say one of the this movie has like actually really incredible production design, and they built a lot of amazing things, including this kind of like beautiful like set that they've built. But they also built this crazy motorcycle for them to be into, and it has an axe,
sidecar, and it has a battle axe, which that battle axe is intended for revenge. It's clearly like a Chekhov's gun type deal, and I think on the poster it's even like it's a fist like holding up the battle axe or something, like and so definitely when I say the A plot, it belongs to the biker bros, it's because clearly like a lot of the story is being pushed by them. The Yakuza elements of the story don't really affect the punk rockers until the slum folk get involved, and the slum folk don't get involved until the biker bros meet them.
Right.
And then their labor is contracted on the real cheap, so that way they can start digging the trenches for the atomic power plant. And then they're immediately tricked after their day of work and put into this like somewhat underground kind of room thing. It's just I don't know what to call it. It's a room. They just lock them in a room like the Yakuza, and they could easily just climb out, and I think they do, but they just all of them get hosed off by the Yakuza.
Yeah, I remember there's a part where they're all just getting power hosed.
Yeah.
They have they're getting like a fire hose down.
And so, that also reminds me of what you mentioned I said earlier about the whole, I think they're psychic. So at one point when they're racing off into the night, I think this is before the second race, or they're on their way to the second race, there's a voiceover that says something along the lines of, this night is going to be real great, or something like that. This is going to be a great night or something. But it's just those two, and they're kind of just like looking at each other for a second. And the moment that the main biker bro, the one with like the silver helmet that covers half his face, goes to work, he recognizes one of the Yakuza guys. And the next time he sees the other his friend, the other biker bro, they look at each other, and then they have this kind of psychic confirmation through visions of like their backstory of how one of their families was essentially murdered by these members of the Yakuza.
Well, isn't it? Don't we think it's the same guy that killed the prostitute?
No. It's a different guy. It's the guy he was talking to in the car when they were going there.
At the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So in the beginning of the movie, there's two guys in the car. It's so funny because the first lines that they say is, "Boy, they sure have done a lot to make this street safer," or something along those lines. Like,
and they immediately get in a car accident.
Yeah, and then they immediately get run off the road by the biker guy.
Yeah.
And what essentially happens is, once the slum folk bust out of their essentially prison, they start chasing the Yakuza around, and this lends to the poor geography that I mentioned about the film earlier, because they're able to chase them essentially to the concert where,
Yeah. But that's kind of also like this is a music video.
yeah, it's a music video. It's clearly a music video. This is a, it's not interested in having a coherent plot necessarily, even though there is one. There is a coherent plot.
But it does seem like they threw it all together while they were making these like massive set pieces,
Right.
which are the concerts.
And honestly, the third act or the climax or whatever, after you deal with a lot of the Yakuza subplot where the slum folk are chasing the Yakuza back to their construction headquarters, and then they start fighting all the people there. And then you have the B plot where it's the rockers that crash the Stalin concert, and they jump them and beat them up and destroy their equipment this time, and then they start playing their own concert. So everyone gets their kind of comeuppance, and then you have the main biker guy who lifts one of the Yakuza guys. I don't know if you remember the scene, and then he literally lifts him up and shoves his head into the ceiling.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so funny. It was so cool.
The violence in this movie is very funny rather than like
it
not
feels
serious.
slapstick.
Yeah, it can be slapstick. Like everyone's just getting pissed and attacking one another
Right.
constantly.
Like
It's very reactive.
there's that one
feeling.
scene where two of them start fighting because one of them broke the TV.
Yes, I love that. That's actually one of my favorite scenes. They're sitting and they're watching. So the punks are kind of. You know what the scenes reminds me of? Have you ever seen SLC Punk?
No.
It reminds me of Bob and Steve-O sitting and watching. They have a TV, but it's just a picture of Ronald Reagan taped to the TV. And they're like sitting and watching it, and it's very, very similar vibes. But anyways, the rockers are watching television, and the television is just basically people talking about how like the red light district, the slums, just like need to be contained, and they're all fucked up. And then someone breaks the TV, and so then they just all end up fighting
because they're like, "Why'd you break the TV?"
Yeah, they're all just.
And then one of them tries to break up the fight, and then gets punched, and then joins the fight.
Yeah, and then everyone just ends up fighting.
And
people are bottled up.
Definitely, and I think that part that lends to the idea that a lot of the violence is just slapstick and humorous is because once there is violence with blood, it's not a humorous moment at all. It lingers on it for a long time, and it kind of makes you a bit uncomfortable with like what had just transpired in that room. Essentially,
it is funny because the movie does kind of have it both ways, where some forms of violence are very funny,
right,
and some forms of violence are like very like predatory and like kind of gross,
right,
and shameful.
Yeah, and I think the film is more
fighting. Like the movie does seem to think that a fight, like a fight, you know what I mean, like a fair fight between people, is something really charming and like whimsical, and something that maybe people should engage in more often just because it's so funny.
Well, every time they play a concert, there's a fight. There's like a brawl that breaks, like the pit opens up.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the climax, I think it's so cool at the climax, especially with the rockers and the Stalin, because the Stalin don't like go away. They get back up and they start playing too. So now there's two crowds listening to two concerts at the same time, and in the middle of those two crowds is a new mosh pit that forms where they're brawling amongst each other.
Where they're fighting still, yeah.
And then the cops show up again, and the cops are also like kind of
how
all
did they get
clad.
This many people? Well, the cops are all like they're cops in like the Tom of Finland like tradition of cops. You know what I mean?
They're all biker.
Yeah,
cops.
they're YMCA. You know what I mean? Like Village People cops. And
I mean, they're all kind of YMCA.
Yeah, everything about it. The whole movie's a little.
They're all village people.
A little village people, yeah. But. In particular, like, the cops are constantly coming, and the cops just fight everyone. The cops aren't like arresting people; they literally don't even come with handcuffs. They just come with billy clubs.
They yell, "Stop right there! Stop resisting! We're arresting you!" And then they just start beating
everyone. They just start
everyone.
wailing on everybody. Yeah,
like, I mean, it's probably just an incredibly accurate depiction of an uber militarized police force.
No, it's really, really funny. But I also think though that like, I don't know, it's a funny movie. It's really funny,
and it's clearly done in a satirical way, because then you wouldn't have like the Stalin throwing literal pig heads at the cops that have been referred to as pigs throughout the film.
That's true.
And well, what?
But actually, a lot of people call people pigs in general, though. Like
Right.
the prostitute calls the guy who kills her a pig while she's dying. She's bleeding to death,
But I think it's
or we don't actually see her die. You see her afterwards.
You see her afterwards.
But she's calling him, like, she says, "Buta, buta, buta." She's calling him a pig.
But coming from they're punks or anarchists. They interact a lot.
There is a giant pig's head, and Ryan, I think it's a real pig's head.
Yeah, which is kind of gross, but also
also hilarious.
Also pretty metal.
Yeah, pretty metal.
And then on top of that, the Stalin don't just keep throwing pig heads, but they throw pig entrails too. I'm pretty sure.
Gross.
Like at the cops.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially just a riot kind of breaks out.
But a riot breaks out like almost every scene.
Yeah.
Like that's like the movie.
But this is like the biggest riot.
Yeah,
by far.
the one at the end is kind of the biggest one. I guess.
Everyone's just brawling now.
Yeah.
No one's really playing music. I mean, they're trying to. They keep getting beat. I think at one point some of the rockers get shot.
Yeah, I think you see the guy's guitar gets shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the guitarists gets
and
shot,
then,
and his
he
guitar
takes a knee, and then he tries to keep playing or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I don't know how you choreograph this level of like chaos.
You know what I just
and like still have it feel like actual chaos.
You know what I just remembered? What happened in the climax? It was one of my favorite scenes.
Mm-hmm. The parts with the industrial equipment when they start rolling in like the.
I
How
totally
do they even get
forgot.
this?
So like,
who rents like a fucking? It's like 2 forklifts, a fucking cement roller, a crane,
or something. Like
how
that.
do they even get access to this stuff?
And like they're all hanging off like Mad Max.
Yeah. Like how did no one get killed? How did no one get rolled over by the like? Did they hire someone who's forklift certified to actually pilot this stuff or what?
So the slum folk chase the Yakuza back to like the construction headquarters, and then the Yakuza escape the construction headquarters and make their way to where essentially the riot is going on at the concert. And the slum folk join in on the riot and start fighting the Yakuza and the cops, along with the rockers and the punks and the anarchists. And the Stalin try to plug their equipment in again. I don't know if you remember this happening, but there's a short circuit that happens, and all of them get electrocuted.
Okay,
and then their set and truck explode, and they all catch fire, and they burn to death, like all of them. And then I have it written down in my notes. Where do I have it?
Electrical issues are a common issue because the first time that the Stalin attacked the rockers, all of the electricity goes out.
Yeah,
too.
the power.
And
goes
they're
out.
all fighting in the dark.
Yeah, and they're just yelling at each other. And so the electrical feedback, electrocutes the Stalin. Their bus explodes and their stage explodes, and they all burn. And they're like, it's just a charred charred pile.
Yeah.
And immediately the rockers go, "How'd you like that?" And he's like, "Hey guys, let's tune it up a notch," which I think is an actual error in the subtitles because they don't start tuning their instruments. They just increase the volume. So I think what it meant to say was, let's turn it up a notch.
Yeah.
But essentially they like play it off as if it was part of the show and the crowd starts to cheer. So yeah, definitely. I don't think there was any hard or
feelings. Yeah, no, it's just not a sincere movie about that kind of stuff.
It's like, holy shit, these guys exploded and died in front of us.
Mm-hmm. But the funny thing is that, like, the first time the Stalins show up, it's like a terrorist attack.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. They like come in and they're like
secret cabal of like red hoods.
Yeah. It's like it's not just like a gang versus gang thing.
Right.
Like it's like a full, yeah.
And I mean, I think it lends to like the warrior kind of.
It does feel very Warriors,
like
just like a world full of people that just all want to punch each other in the face.
And like they have a theme too.
Yeah, they all do have themes too. Yeah.
And so after that, so the stormtrooper cops show up and they're like, disperse. And they say that once, and the riot continues. And the second time they say it, I think they finally launched their RPGs.
Yeah, they started shooting rocket launchers at people.
And then like everything just starts blowing up, like everywhere. Sparks are I'm surprised I don't think any, from what I can understand, no one really got hurt. And I'm so surprised that like nothing happened. No set collapsed during all of those explosions.
I just don't know how they maintain the intensity throughout like every single sequence.
There's so much energy, and it's
very, very kinetic. It reminds me a little bit of like There's this French director, Romain Gavras.
Uh-huh.
I feel like he's like someone today that tries to channel a little bit of this stuff,
Right.
with just getting a lot of people together and just the vibes. But I mean, it's difficult to compare to. Honestly, I can't even imagine someone getting this many people together to have that many extras.
Yeah, and to just
It's impossible
get
to
it
imagine.
coordinated like that.
Yeah, impossible.
It kind of gave me like, this is like indie Waterloo. Have you seen Waterloo?
Oh, sure. I mean, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like it's literally like legions and legions of military or like military troops and stuff like that. Where in this case it's just legions and legions of punks.
Yeah.
Like, how do you organize that?
Yeah, I have no idea. At some point, you just got to start rolling because they're gonna do whatever the hell they're gonna do, I guess.
I mean, and I think that kind of lends like to the whole. It's all just B-roll.
Yeah. Yeah. But
And I definitely get that vibe where it's just like, just shoot, like literally just shoot, and we'll figure it out afterwards. And a lot of the story comes from, I feel like, is the afterwards or whatever, because that's like the biker bro plot essentially. That's the overarching like narrative crux or narrative driving force, which I think is so funny that once they
But they don't even speak. They don't even have lines.
They have, I think, maybe one line at most. And once they finally get their revenge with the battle axe and stuff like that, he has the vision again, except the vision of the guy that he needs to kill, that the guy he just killed
Is somebody else.
The face changes to someone else's face, and now he's just kind of left dumbfounded and just goes back to his other homie, and they get on their bike.
I do love paranoia like that. It's
Yeah.
punk rock.
Which I think is super, super interesting, because then it just lends to the whole maybe they kind of are just a little out of their mind. They aren't as reliable a narrator, despite not narrating really.
They don't say anything.
And I think the cops, the white stormtrooper cops fire their RPGs, everything blows up, and then like it goes dead silent for like a couple seconds.
Yeah.
And then everyone goes ape shit and just starts tearing down the cops and like tearing down everyone, and it just goes absolutely crazy. The rockers get busted up, they get shot, they finally beat up the cops that beat them up earlier and arrested them, and the lead singer stands up and then looks dead into camera and yells, "Don't fuck with me." And I think that's kind of the end of the movie, because then after that, it just goes back to the biker bros, and it's just them racing off. So essentially, the movie ends the same way it
opens, which is this really, really awesome time lapse footage
Right.
of just driving on a motorcycle like down the freeway,
and
which is
through
fucking sick.
through parts of Japan,
Yeah.
like the freeway, and then industrial places, and then like cityscapes, and how the lights just all blend together. It's just really, really cool, because
It's really cool. And I think the movie like has like this weird way of like just capturing like the natural excitement
despite it being a time lapse thing, and it being like that kind of motif being reused throughout the film, especially with like the cars and the racing of the cars and the biker bros racing through at night. It still has a really intense sense of speed, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't feel slow. It feels like, oh man, we're moving
I think
dangerously fast.
Yeah, I think that's actually what makes the time lapse when you're actually moving makes it look even faster.
Right. And I think another aspect is that helps it is the fact that a lot of the sound is still real time.
Right.
So even though everything's moving slower, the intensity of everything going on is amplified with the real time sound. It's almost like your eyes are trying to catch up with what you're hearing.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Or vice versa. Yeah, totally. What I think is really cool about this movie is it kind of like captures like the natural excitement of just what a camera can do. Like some of like the shots that get you amped about this movie are just like a sweeping pan of like neon lights, or of like people's feet, or of like someone, you know what I mean? Just like the little body languages of a person. Like this movie takes a camera and just like pushes what it can record and what it can capture into something just very, very intense. It's like,
and I think part of that is like the hybridization of cinematic, like, what is it? Not ideologies, but like mediums, because like part of it definitely feels like it was filmed at a live concert, so it was like concert cinematography.
right.
And other parts of it feel more choreographed, like a music video. So then it's music video cinematography,
Right.
and then there are other aspects of it that are definitely more filmic in nature and more.
But it's also, I mean,
cinematic.
like the edits are extremely aggressive.
Right.
I mean, this is like, some cuts are maybe like a second apart, maybe less.
Right.
It's so aggressively edited. And
it just keeps like that hyperkinetic energy, like continuous and like consistent.
right.
It doesn't feel like.
But it is 2 hours of it too, which is
which
kind
is-
of overwhelming. I'm actually
There are like sections where there is like, I feel like a breather. I feel like you could say, but it always feels like it's like ramping up to the next
Right.
explosion or whatever.
even the breathers are not like,
really breathers. They're still tense.
and I actually felt a little bit about that. I actually just saw finally.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I honestly feel like does this thing where like a sequence of him like walking out to get the mail would be treated as dramatically as whether or not he's going to have his like security clearance revoked.
Okay.
And it just feels like the intensity, the constant ramp, the constant like epicness of that movie is a little exhausting. This movie does that a little bit as well, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were really supposed to talk about. Oh well, but
you can cut it. You can blank me out.
no, it's all good. But no, I definitely agree because like it just feels like just this like yeah, like you said, essentially attributing it to like the whole revoking of the key card. It's like this ticking almost, this winding up to like the midnight of the doomsday clock, or like
But it's just constant.
Yeah.
And so 2 hours of it is a little exhausting actually, and that's I think part of why I've treated it in the past, and I think I've even seen it like in the background on the TV at like a bar somewhere, and it suits it so perfectly. Because it has so much ambiance and it has such a vibe.
That's such a interesting point you make, because this is definitely like a bar movie that you can definitely see like just being played in the background, or like a VHS rental store or DVD rental store, like it's just on.
Yeah.
And like the store clerk is like watching it like maybe half,
kind of.
yeah, it's not really paying attention. It's more of just something that to vibe to in the background, and it is far more, I think we've said this before, but far more interested in presenting a vibe or an aesthetic than it is conveying
a
story. But still it maintains like it is a film, if that makes sense.
But even like if you think about it, like the Stalin don't really have like a personality or a character.
Yeah,
you know
they
just get fucking killed in the end, and that's it. And the movie's like ha ha ha, and
they're just anarchist assholes, and then they die.
Yeah, exactly.
They wear red. The bad guys wear red.
The bad guys wear red. That's one of the themes of this show.
Yeah, and the Yakuza guys aren't. They're kind of dealt with, sort of,
but not really.
Not really. Their leader,
the movie, it doesn't end with like that much. Like the big resolution is that everybody comes together to kick the shit out of the cops.
Yeah,
there isn't really like a resolution beyond that. Yeah,
yeah. But that kind of goes back to the whole biker bros, because even then doesn't feel resolved. They go back to doing the thing that they were doing in the first place.
Back to the road, baby.
Which, honestly, now that I think about it, I think the only reason they thought they needed to kill the guy they needed to kill is because they just saw them in the car in the beginning of the movie. That these were they just ran, they
just saw them like, that's the person we need to kill,
right? And they just tricked themselves into believing that this was all fate or destiny, and this is integral to them getting their revenge with their Chekhov gun or Chekhov battle axe.
Within 10 minutes after the end of this movie, they find somebody else that they're like, that's the person.
That's the guy.
That's the guy. That's the one we need to get.
I mean, they're such fun characters, honestly.
They're really cool and really funny.
One of the funniest.
They definitely provide a lot of flavor to the.
Well, there's so much intensity with them too, because they're distrustful of the other slum folk.
Sure.
And when the leader of the slum folk like offers them food, they don't eat it until he walks away. But then once the biker bro gets a job, he like starts going ham at the job digging the hole.
Yeah, I thought that part was really funny.
And I was like, wow.
I especially like it because that is another time where they play that in sped up. And the movie's constantly ramping up and speeding up and slowing down, slow-moing, and then loops of things. Like especially in a big fight, there'll be a loop of a segment where it's almost like the movie's like playing a GIF over and over and over again. But in particular, this part where he's digging so fast.
Right, and they're all just like staring at him. They're like,
they have like no emotional reaction to him digging like this whatsoever. They're like bemused. They're entirely like unamused.
I think they were like funny. Digging at first, and they noticed just how intensely he was going at it, and they just kind of all stopped. And were like, okay, is this guy okay here? Which there's just so much kind of like Lady Snowblood in the last week, but not too as a artistic or cinematic extreme of every scene in this movie is a still.
But Lady Snowblood is like very patient compared to this.
Right. This one is more of like a grunge photo of everything. Like it's a dirty, kind of dingy kind of photograph that you can get of every single scene in this film, or like, you know.
But this movie's like cracked out. Like this entire movie is like very cracked out.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is like kind of an original cinematic language that it's like kind of establishing and creating.
I think that another, like, you know, I think it's so funny that you mentioned it being cracked out, because there's a morning routine. We get a morning wake up routine within the rockers, and they're like, oh, what are we gonna do today? And one of the dudes is like, is just holding a mannequin lady the entire time. He's like, I don't know, man. Wasn't there supposed to be something we were supposed to do today? I don't know. I don't care.
Yeah.
What time is it? I don't know.
Who knows?
Who knows?
It's funny though, because I think like we talked earlier a little bit about like movies like Crank,
right,
which are like kind of Hollywood movies that imitate the style a little bit. Not throughout entirely, but definitely like
trying to capture that frenetic or like hyperkinetic aspect or energy.
Right.
Which I don't think that Hollywood or in a studio setting could really replicate as organically as this movie has like clearly done.
Yeah.
Or been able to, you know, put forward, because.
But there are attempts, and it definitely, you can see, like it's like you said before, you can definitely see where little stylistic elements have been like borrowed or taken.
I think the closest you can get, like in the terms of American cinema, is like guerrilla style filmmaking, for the most part. Like, you know, done in like, you know, urban cities and stuff like that. No permits. A lot of them tend to be very critical on, you know, like organizations like the police and stuff like that. And guerrilla style films tend to also revolve around niches or subcultures.
Are you thinking of one in particular?
No, I'm just thinking like the 60s and 70s, like independent blaxploitation, not necessarily blaxploitation, but like the wave of black filmmakers, and the way they were essentially trying to capture the experience, you know, not from a studio's perspective, because especially in the 60s and 70s, that wouldn't be something super popular with like a studio to necessarily do, unless it was exploitative or for the purpose of exploitation, if that makes sense. But in the same vein, this film is like capturing that, like a glimpse at a subculture of a group that is othered by society.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe, and what's interesting is it also kind of, the movie kind of implies that some of it may be by choice too, but it's like by something like interior, something internal that drives you to be like this.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up too, because now that you mention it, there was that one like kind of line where it's like, you know, I don't want to work, you know, I'm an artist, I just want to like, you know,
I love that part, and the guy laughs, artistic. He laughs at him for saying that he was an artist.
Yeah. Which is
they're working at the factory job, right? And that's before they suplex that guy.
Yeah.
They're like, we're artists, we don't work. This is stupid, you know? Right. And then the guy's like, ha ha ha, artists, and then they
suplex him.
They suplex him. It's pretty awesome, actually.
They hit him with the tag team.
Yeah, they really did.
He stood no chance. Everyone else was just watching it happen too.
Yeah.
Like any of the other employees could have stepped in and stopped this. No. Which I think, if anything, is like deep down inside, maybe everyone else wanted to do this too. Because Because the film has an interesting theme of inflicting violence onto your boss.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the
other guy.
rockers.
The
other guy does it to the Yakuza guy. The slum folk do it to their Yakuza bosses.
Yeah, this movie has some like weird wish fulfillment about wanting to kick the crap out of your boss, which
Yeah.
I vibe with. I had a boss slap me once. I wasn't very cool.
Jesus, that's
Yeah, he did it in front of a bunch of like people too.
what the hell, man?
Yeah, we were at like a company party, and he slapped me in front of like a large group of people.
That's really messed up.
Yeah, it was fucking crazy. It was a magazine I worked at.
What?
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure at that time, if I thought like, man, I'm gonna suplex this guy,
You probably could have.
I mean, that's the thing though. Like I didn't, So I get it. I get
Hey,
wanting to suplex your boss.
If anything, he's lucky you didn't suplex him. Probably been devastating.
Honestly, the thing about it was that it was so cringy. What he was doing at that moment, that I just wanted it to be over.
Was it like a drunk boss moment?
He had been drinking.
Okay.
Everybody had been drinking.
Right.
Like I was.
Or was it like a boss trying to be one of like the guys, or like?
No, he was. I think it was funny. So the entire company was like mostly he was a guy, but most of my coworkers were women, and so it was like surrounded by like beautiful women. Like everybody I worked with were like these gorgeous women, and I was just like laughing and talking with them, and he and I were the only guys, and so it was me and him, and there's like a bunch of really pretty girls, and then he like slapped me in front of all of them. And everyone was fucking silent, and it was so fucking weird.
Yeah.
And then he kept trying to buy me drinks for the rest of the night. It was just fucking awkward.
It's that kind of like uber like toxic masculinity.
It was super
thing
toxic,
right? Where he's like, because you're the only two guys.
Yeah, no, it was fucking weird. He made it weird. Like it wasn't weird that we were the only two guys, and he made it fucking weird.
By that's just so. Yeah, like what the heck, dude?
Yeah, Mikey George, if you ever see this, I think that was a weird ass thing of you to do, bro.
Hey, Mikey, I don't know you, man, but yeah, that was a weird ass fucking thing you did, man.
That was a weird thing you did, man.
I think you should let Griffin slap you. Just to make it
I
fair.
can't even remember. He may have even offered that night, but like at that point, it was weird. You know what I mean? Like we were all having a fun, cool, good time,
and just out of nowhere, it's just like was it forehand or backhand?
It was open-handed. But yeah, it was just weird. It was fucking weird. It was really cringy. I was super embarrassed. I wasn't even embarrassed for being hit.
You shouldn't be embarrassed. Like that's like he should be embarrassed.
Well, he probably was, which is like why he probably kept drinking and wanting. He like thought if he drinks enough, he won't remember what happened. You know what I mean? Kind of.
That doesn't matter because everyone else will.
Of course. But like I mean I wasn't embarrassed because like I had been emasculated. I was embarrassed because of how cringeworthy of a scenario it was. Like it was not a scenario I wanted to be in, and he made me be in this super awkward, embarrassing situation with him. You know,
it's like that. It's like when you're
like I didn't want to be in a toxic masculinity situation in front of like all my like pretty female.
He's trying to like
coworkers.
Like uber bro type.
I think I don't know. Who knows though? That's the thing. Like I don't think he was thinking straight. You know what I mean? Like that's not coherent. Because any normal person would have seen that and would have not done that because they would have seen that it was embarrassing for them to do it.
Right. At the same time, it's like that's just a real dumb thing to do.
It was weird.
It was really weird, really dumb.
It was weird, but I get why people want to suplex their boss.
Yeah. After hearing that, I totally get why you would want to suplex your boss.
Mikey, I don't want to suplex you, but I get why somebody might want to.
Was there anything like in particular that like stood out that you were like absolutely?
The crazy thing is, every movie we've watched, with the exception of maybe Lady Oscar. Lady Oscar is like a cool movie, but like I wouldn't say like the cinematography is anything to write home about. But the last two we've watched have had very, very impressive cinematography, and I'd say this one even outdoes the last one, which is like pretty impressive. It's not as many beautiful static images, and the composition isn't quite as thoughtful, but I mean like the level of detail is incredible.
I see what you're saying. So it's like, I think also comparing the two is kind of,
they're like opposites.
Yeah, essentially opposites of the opposite ends of the spectrum. Sorry. Like one is super rooted in like formalism, kind of, not really formalism, but form. Yeah. And like, you know, the function of shot composition and blocking, whereas the other is more interested in just conveying a feeling.
Yeah. But like but they're like completely different speeds.
Right.
Like one of them is like sometimes at the exact speed and pace of like literal falling snow.
Right.
And this one is just like snorting as like much like nitrous as you can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this one is just like all fucking
The
balloons.
The pedal hit the floor
Yeah.
a long time ago, and the foot has not come off the gas.
Yeah, and we're way over the cliff.
Yeah. We drove so hard. We're trying to see if there's another side.
Yeah, exactly.
Which,
I hope that we get to come back to Electric Dragon 80,000 volts at another occasion to talk about that one.
yeah, I would love to
That one's really
see.
interesting,
Is it Ishii's?
Sogo Ishii.
Yeah, Sogo Ishii's other
Gakuryu
work.
Ishii.
I would say the only thing that like it's a personal gripe of mine, the general like lack of geography
Mhm.
or poor conveyance of geography.
Yeah, there's not world building really.
I wouldn't. Yeah, kind of.
Mhm.
There's yeah. I think that's interesting way to put it. More of just like I don't know where everything is really. It just feels like we're teleporting kind of.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I will say that good world building I think benefits that in a way.
Like, and it doesn't. It kind of feels like an older Persona map where it's like you just like go into one direction and then you wind up coming south on the map or something like that.
Yeah, it's Star Fox 64.
Yeah, that's another good example.
Mhm.
And other than that, like another like kind of again, this is like a personal issue more. It's like there it's kind of hard to understand the continuity the film is trying to convey when there are certain scenes that I think are implied to be flashbacks, but are not necessarily said explicit or conveyed explicitly to be flashbacks.
Yeah.
Like I think when one of the biker bros is in jail with the other guy with the rockers, right? I think that's a flashback because I don't think the rockers were necessarily arrested that then and there, or either because I don't know when things happen in time. I
The
guess.
movie has so many sensations and feelings going around that you don't really have time to figure out what the sequence.
I definitely
of
think it's like
events
I
are.
had to kind of like definitely like concentrate more to figure out which sequences were kind of telling me what was going on, which I don't think that's a detriment to a film watching experience.
This movie's so much more interested in vibe.
Exactly. Like I mean, we keep saying that, but definitely it's just so much more interested in like in vibe.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I mean,
it's intense. It's fun.
and
I will say that like this movie and probably the one that came before it. I mean, in these films, and maybe even some of the ones he comes up with after. I mean, he's like really establishing like a singularly unique
kind of style.
Yeah, such a style that it could only be imitated. It could never be, like it's very, very, very unique.
Right. And
it's like a cinematic language to its own.
And like we were talking earlier, and definitely other movies are clearly drawing inspiration from this film. Which, I mean, I look at the stormtrooper like super military cops or whatever, and I didn't necessarily immediately go with stormtroopers. Well, I kind of did because they're wearing white and stuff like that. But my initial thought was, oh, these look like the Kerberos unit from Jinro, like Oshi's work. And like Oshi is super critical on militarization and the role of policing in a society and stuff like that. Like this is entire kind of deal.
Well, and the kind of violence, the way the violence is depicted in the early parts of Akira is very similar to the way that the punk on punk violence is in this movie as well. And the kind of robot, like the kind of motorcycle violence, it's very.
And maybe not like opening Akira, but definitely like after, like at the end of the film, which is actually kind of just I think the climax of the manga's first arc, where Neo Tokyo, right, is just an island now because like it kind of blew up, so now it's just connected, like it's all in ruin. That's kind of the vibe I got from Burst City, essentially. Like Burst City to me felt like this isolated kind of island city almost, where there are only so many roads that could take you in or out of there, and it's ruled by like the social systems in that city don't follow what we understand to be like morally conventional or anything. That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's
the institutions have like dissolved, and what's left is what's left.
Right. And
I actually don't know that much about the later part of the manga because I've never finished it. I need to go back and finish. So I have no idea what the actual climax of Akira is. You're welcome to ruin it for me in the comments.
I'm trying to think now. I think it's just Akira reforms his body and then
and like as a character.
Yeah. And then Tetsuo.
We don't need to go through it now, but I should read all that. But I do know that what the climax of the movie is not the climax it's like something that happens almost about halfway through.
Right. But what other things from this movie? Oh, but yeah, I mean, in general, I feel like this movie is just clearly used for inspiration for other things, just all over the place.
Definitely, it is a ripe, it's a ripe tree to take creative fruit from for sure.
Are there any closing remarks? Any last things that you want to?
No, but I mean, also in the comments, let me know what your favorite '80s Japanese movies are. Maybe we'll talk about them at some point. I've been seeing that Tokyo Pop has been showing in limited showings around LA, which is like a funny Western Japanese musical movie around the same time period.
Yeah, I don't really got much else to add either.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done.
Cool. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around until making it to the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed. We hope you come back. And to answer Griffin's question, what was your question again?
I don't remember.
I think you said
favorite 80s Japanese movies? Yeah. Favorite movie shot in Japan in the 80s.
All right.
The Black Rain? Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.